The egoless state is therefore something unique. It does not belong to the world order at all, to which the three states belong. We have seen already that there is a profounder sleep, the sleep of ignorance, by which the real self is veiled, so that it is possible to take the ego at its face value as the real self. The egoless state is the state of unclouded reality, where it shines as the pure I am. This is sometimes called the fourth state, Turiya, to distinguish it from the three. But this is just a tentative description. In one of the Upanishads, it is carefully said, they regard it as a fourth state. The sage tells us the peaceful and timeless state of the sage, called waking sleep, Jagrat Sushupti, which to those that live in the vicious circle of the three states of waking, dream, and sleep, is said to be the fourth state, and is alone real. The other three are merely false appearances. Therefore the wise ones call that state, which is pure consciousness, the transcendental state, Turiya. Thus it is clear that there are not four states, but only one, which is the natural state of the self as the sole reality. The description of the natural state as waking sleep is very instructive. It tells us that it is the true waking, but that it resembles sleep. This is clearly brought out in the Gita, which says, "The sage is awake to that which is as good as night to all creatures. All that to which the creatures are awake is night to the wide-awake sage." The meaning is that the sage who abides in the egoless state is awake to that which alone is true, which is the self, Atman. The world is night to him because, being unreal, it is not seen by him at all. Thus day and night are distributed between the sage and the ignorant. What is day to the sage is night to the ignorant, and what is night to the sage is day to them. We have seen already that this day of the sage is beginningless as well as endless, because time is unreal. Since true waking is this egoless state of deliverance or mukti, and not the dream miscalled waking by the ignorant, it follows that the believers in heavens of sorts, where the ego is to endure forever, do not want to awake, but only to dream in a more pleasant fashion. This is clearly due to their invincible attachment to ego-ridden existence. Because of this attachment, the loss of the ego appears to them as the worst of deaths. But really, as the sages testify, this ego-ridden existence is like death, the only death there is, because it keeps us in a perpetual exile from our true life, the real self. Having lost that, we have lost all. In fact, as the sage has clearly pointed out, birth is not birth because we are born only to die, and death is not death because we die only to be born again. On the other hand, the attaining of the natural state is true birth, because then death is dead once for all. Of the sage in that state, Sri Ramana said, "That man of elevated mind is alone really born, who has been born in the source of his being, the supreme reality, through the quest, whence am I? He is born once for all, never to die any more. That Lord of the wise is ever new." Being the reality beyond time, he is ever new, ever fresh, unaffected by the passing of time. We may repeat here what we have noticed before, namely that the sage himself is the most convincing proof of the natural state. By coming into direct contact with a living sage, we can sense, though somewhat dimly, yet in a way that will change our lives, the greatness and glory of the real self. In the sage, the self will appear to us as it really is, the greatest of all gains. We shall then see that the self, Atman, is the fulfillment of all desires and the annulment of all fear. We shall see that what the sacred lore tells us about the self is far from exaggerated, that in fact that lore has not told us a millionth part of the greatness of the self. It has to be said that this self, which we are always, even now, in spite of ignorance, seems to be a good deal too great for the many clever but little minds that set up to be religious. The sacred lore that tells them about the natural state does not appeal to them at all. They are after the winning of powers, which they shall possess and enjoy. Winning these powers, called cities, they hope to enjoy a much more glorious status in the universe. And these powers are to be won by various occult practices. Some even propose to win them through what they call knowledge of the self, though how they could win right knowledge while cherishing these selfish ambitions is difficult to understand. Physical immortality and even sovereignty over all creation are aspired to by some. These men seem to feel that God has not proved a success as the governor of the universe, and that they themselves can do the work far better after winning the necessary equality with God and then superseding him. They promised the world at large that if and when their turn should come, they would establish a heaven on earth. The sage has repeatedly told us that the care of the world is not our business, but God's. There would be no need to take any notice of these false teachers, but for the fact that many really good people are led astray by their teaching, which is superficially attractive. So that his own disciples at least may not go astray, the sage tells us that these powers, cities, are in the realm of ignorance, and hence unreal. From his own words, the sage said, "True city is one's own natural state, in which one is the real self, and which is won by becoming aware of that self, which we already are. The other cities are like those that are won in a dream. Does anything gained in a dream remain true on waking? Can the sage that has cast off falsehood by becoming fixed in the real be deluded by them?" Here it is made clear that these powers are false. We know the reason, namely that they are the creations of the ego. And he that wins these cities sinks deeper into the ignorance that is bondage and worldly suffering. To the genuine seeker of the self, they sometimes come unsought, before he attains egolessness. And in that case, they are to him a snare, and he must renounce them, and after they pass from him, must begin over again. If they come after the natural state is won, he would not be aware of them and would not be affected by them. We may here take special note of the statement that there is no need to become the self or win the self. The ideas of becoming or winning the self are on the face of them absurd, since we are always the self. We are never other than self or Atman. And if Atman were something to be won, it might be lost again. As Atman is the self, it can never be lost. But these cities or spiritual powers are not naturally our own. Therefore, they will not be ours forever, but will be lost in due course. There is another contrast between the true city, the natural state, and the false ones. The self is one. The cities are many. Manifoldness is a mark of unreality. Unity is a sign of reality. All this is in keeping with the main teaching of Revelation, both old and new, that the real self is the one reality that transcends time and space, and that all else is unreal. Hence it follows that the natural state is not in time. Hence it can never have a beginning nor an end, for beginning and end are in time, which is unreal. The real self is one, and its oneness too has no beginning, because manifoldness is always unreal, as we saw in the last chapter. Therefore it is that the sage is not aware of having become free. Once he was asked when he became free, and the sage of Arunachala, Bhagavan, replied, "Nothing has happened to me. I am as I have always been." This means that bondage and freedom are both in relativity and are both unreal. This is what the sage tells us when he says, "If the thought, 'I am bound,' arises, then will arise also the thought of deliverance. When by the quest of 'who am I that is bound,' the ever-free real self alone remains, ageless and deathless, then how can the thought of bondage arise? If that thought does not arise, then how can the thought of deliverance arise to him that has done with actions?" As this natural state is not in time, so too it is not in space. We do not need to go somewhere to some distant world to be free and always happy. This we have already seen. Deliverance is here and now, if only we lose the ego. Ignorance, bondage, and the incidents of bondage, namely all this multiplicity and difference, do not exist even now. Therefore it follows that the sage who is egoless does not see all this, which seems so real to us. For him, this cinema show of the world and its seer, the ego, have ceased, so he does not recognize its having been seen before. For him, the screen alone remains, the light of consciousness. The moving pictures have vanished. That screen we know now is the pure I am, on which is imposed by ignorance the whole of this false appearance. Therefore, the sage said, "Since we see the world, it follows that there is one Supreme Being, of whose power of illusion all this is a becoming. This cannot be disputed. All the four things, namely the pictures consisting of names and forms, their supporting screen, the light, and the seer, are not different from him, the real self in the heart." The true self, it is here expressly pointed out, is not itself the cause of this variety. It has no becoming, as shown before. What becomes the universe is Maya, the mysterious power that has to be assumed as belonging to the self, to the account for the world appearance. This Maya is the same as mind, which is the ego. And out of this Maya or illusion come forth the four, of which the individual soul is one, and that is why it is unreal. Therefore, it follows that this false appearance will persist only so long as the ego sense continues, not after the extinction of ego. Therefore, we have to understand that to the sage, the world does not appear, though it may appear to others that the sage sees the world, and though the sage himself does not always deny seeing the world. There are certain other details about this state which can conveniently be studied in a later chapter, where we shall seek to understand something about the sage whose state of reality it is. This transcendent state, which alone is true, is obscured by the ego and its creations, the mind, body, and world, in the same way as the rope is obscured by the snake. Therefore, they are declared to be unreal as such, that the element of reality in them is only Atman, the Self. Those that want to realize for themselves the reality of the real have to turn aside from the world by accepting the teaching that is unreal and seek the truth within the heart in the manner shown by the sage of Arunachala and described in the next chapter.